Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely perfectly. We've got really good
Fantastic.
facilities here
Looks
for this
good.
event, and pretty much a full house this morning. So you've got about an hour and a half. I know we've just lent into 10 minutes of it, but we'll catch up on
Yep,
that if you need the full time, and depending on the Q&A. I think you've been with us before, so I don't think you need to do a formal introduction anymore. And I think we just go straight in if that's okay.
absolutely. Well, yeah, good morning, everybody. Paul Abbott's my name. I'm coming to you from Perth, Australia. So it's 7 hours ahead in time. So I thought it would be not too inappropriate if I toasted DPUK
It's
30
all right.
years.
We're drinking here anyway,
So,
so
oh, excellent.
we're all in this
Um,
together, Paul.
Good, good. Past, present, and of course, here's to many future members. Of course, I feel a real kinship with Dealey Plaza UK, being also a non-American that's absolutely been fascinated by the assassination of President Kennedy for 30 years. I won't go into my background too much, but a lot of you will know, I guess I kind of came into the research community by way of doing the Garrison folders index. And that body of work was inspired by the work that Paul Blow was doing at the time. And I gather Paul is there in the room, so a
Yeah.
cheerio to Paul. But the work that he was doing at the time, and a lot of the in-depth knowledge that he was getting from the Garrison materials back then really inspired me to get into action with finally something to contribute to the cause of researching all things to do with President Kennedy's assassination. And of course, what that led to for me was unpicking a rather long and I'm still picking this thread when it comes to the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. I put together a book and was very proud to promote it and announce it last year at again virtually at your conference in October of last year. Death to Justice, the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald, and again I must acknowledge Paul for providing me a very generous foreword for that book as well. So very good to be with you. It's been an interesting time since the books come out. I've been able to have many fantastic conversations, both email, but across the podcasts. Of course, being down here in Australia, it's not so easy to get to places, but so it's been fantastic to be a part of some really good podcast conversations. I think, including with some of the people there in the room, Paul, Scott. I think we were on one together on Out of the Blank, and Bart, if you're there as well. It was good to support you in that Out of the Blank episode as well. But it's just been really good to really just put a light on the other murder that took place on the weekend of November 22nd. Of course, the shooting, the murder, the execution of Lee Oswald on Sunday, November 24th. Now, last year I did go into very general very general overview of the book. So I try and do that again this time. I thought what I'd do, and it's in the title of my talk, is really just go into some very interesting aspects that I kind of touched on in the book, but then some others which I hadn't really gone into too much depth because it was very much an exercise of casting the spotlight as solidly as I could on the actual shooting of Oswald. So getting into the presence of people in the basement, how Ruby entered, his handling, and all of that. Of course, the Chief Jesse Curry's acquiescence to the media, not just all of that weekend, but of course the morning of Oswald's shooting. So really, that the book is very concentrated on the shooting. So I thought today, with yourselves as being a very informed audience, of course. I thought I might talk across a few distinct parts, sections, because I'd love to be able to talk with you all a little bit more. So I'm going to present in sections, and hopefully, if anyone has any feedback or questions or comments based on what I've discussed, then we can have a bit more of an open discussion, if that's okay. So yeah, without further ado, so really, what my book did was it really I guess it showed the Dallas City Hall basement to be its own crime scene with many stories, many narratives going on, very much like Dealey Plaza and, of course, the Ambassador Hotel kitchen. So many things going on, and it really is its own, very complex crime scene. So, for me, I guess what I'm going to focus on a little bit today is the evidence of clear evidence of Dallas police involvement, not just in the actual shooting, the setting up of it, but also the start of the cover up. So I'm going to be getting into that a little bit more. What's really come from my book is subsequent articles that I've put out on my own Substack page, but I've also been had the privilege to put some up on Kennedy's and King as well. So that's been really good. What I might do, I also have a YouTube channel, so I'm going to get started by sharing my screen and actually playing a bit of the footage of, I guess we could call it the pre-shooting footage that was taken down in the basement. It's very useful, actually, because we don't have the benefit of that with Dealey Plaza and indeed the Ambassador Hotel kitchen. But this is literally a case of 10 minutes worth of footage, and I won't go right the way through it at nauseum, but we do have the benefit of seeing some very key movements and some interesting little narratives that unfolded and kind of tied in directly to obviously what would transpire at 11:21 a.m., which is, of course, Oswald's shooting. So I'm going to get it up and running and share my screen. So now hopefully you'll be able to see this footage. Can you see the armored truck there at the top of Commerce Street ramp?
Yep.
Excellent. So I've got no audio to this, so you're going to be stuck with my voice. But again, very interesting thing to really dissect and go through. So this footage is obviously the armored truck that was called on by Deputy Chief Charles Batchelor. The original idea of the plan of the transfer was to transport Oswald from City Hall to the county jail in the back of an armored truck. The story goes that with the truck, let me just skip back a little bit. The story goes with the truck that it wasn't able to, when it came to that position, they realised that it wasn't able to back down the ramp because of how low the ceilings were. If you read Harold J. Fleming's testimony, it was never the intent to back the truck all the way down the ramp into the basement, obviously be on hand for Oswald to be shifted into. Just on account of this particular truck had battery problems even as early as that very morning. So they were a little bit nervous about obviously parking this truck on the incline of the ramp, and if the battery was a little bit was playing up again, they wouldn't be able to execute obviously a hill start to get on out of there. So this was always the intent for the truck to get into this position. There was a smaller truck, which you do see in footage as Oswald's being taken away in the ambulance. That was a bit of a backup and could only carry 2 people. But anyway, this footage was taken by Gene Pasculek. He was the KRLD cameraman who was working with the likes of Robert Huffaker, Nelson Benton. And funnily enough, he was noted as being down in the basement at the time of the shooting, but he never testified, was never asked to testify. And this, because it's KRLD TV footage and it's clearly on a pedestal out the front, could only have been taken by Gene Barnes. So even as late as a couple of minutes before I picked up this particular part, reporters were still able to access the basement from the other side of this, the truck down this side of the ramp. Because on this side, it was very, very close to the wall. So the unknown Japanese reporter, Theo Waldo, people like that, you could see were let in to come down to to be led into the basement and take their position. And that is earlier in this footage. So I'm just going to keep it going now. And what we'll see in a couple of seconds is the search of the back of the truck. Nothing really too eventful here, other than just to note it was people like Glenn King, Vernon Smart, Detective James Watson, and the likes of Sergeant Patrick Dean and James Putnam that were kind of shifting in and out of the truck, doing a bit of a search, getting it ready. So just important to note now, around about the time this truck's been here for a few minutes now, and everybody's clearly still under the assumption that the truck is going to be used for the transfer. So, we haven't even had the order come down from Chief Curry, and by way of Captain Fritz, changing their plans at the last minute to move Oswald not in this armoured truck, but in the back of Charles Doherty's car. So these officers, these personnel are still operating under the assumption that Oswald's going to be moved in this armoured truck. Moving forward a little bit more. Let's skip forward a little bit. What's great about this footage is we get to identify some people really early on in the piece. So that's James Watson, who will be standing very close to where Ruby will actually leap out from and shoot Oswald. Walking up the ramp now, I gather that's Pat Dean, Sergeant Patrick Dean, who I will well and truly get into a little bit later. And joining them very soon, this is Sergeant James Putnam. Now, Dean and Sergeant Putnam were in charge of the security arrangements for the basement. It was actually Dean who was in charge and Putnam was his offsider. So they're clearly talking about last-minute preparations, maybe aware or not that the cameras are fixed on them. But the benefit of this footage is we get to see people that have otherwise only ever been spoken about and that we've seen in pictures, photographs, and maybe in Dean's case, the Men Who Killed Kennedy documentary. We've been able to see him, but it's great to see some contemporary footage, as it were, of some key figures that would obviously come into things in a few minutes' time. The footage will very soon swing down now to actually focus on the corridor. So now this is the angle that it will remain at. I'm just going to pause here because this is an interesting little piece to highlight. This is a WBAP TV camera that was brought down from the third floor very much at the last minute. So Dave Timmins and John Tankersley are the two personnel that are wheeling it down. They were up there to interview Jesse Curry. And then when they found out that the transfer was about to happen, they got the camera down into the elevator and out into the basement to obviously film the start of the transfer down in the basement. An interesting point here is that the gentleman standing here is Roy Lee Lowry. That's where he would be when Oswald would emerge. And next to him is Billy Combest. Now, they're two names to remember in a little bit. But wheeling out the camera are two operators. So Dave Timmins and John Tankersley. You can see there, it is a little bit tricky. They are a little bit obscured, but there clearly is only two people. You can see a couple of sets of feet and this chap in the foreground. It was actually originally posited in the minutes after the shooting that this might have been the way that Jack Ruby entered the basement, undercover as a member of the media, helping to move this camera into place. But he wasn't one of these two people, obviously. And we know that because these two people, Tankersley and Timmins, testified to each other wheeling the camera into place. And the Dallas police personnel that were in the lift with them on the way down also said there were only two men with a camera in the elevator with them. So we've kind of got that settled straight away. But how it emerged was you can see Roy Lowry there watching the camera go by. He stays very still, doesn't move. What happened at that point was that camera was actually being wheeled down into the basement car park. Now, I know some of you have actually been there to the basement. You'll know there's a little incline. Actually, just on my screen here, if you can see, just behind me is that little decline. Sorry. And there was a bit of a worry that the camera would actually topple over as it was being pushed down the ramp. So a third person did rush over to stop that from happening, and that was news director Jimmy Turner. That was the third person. Now, Lowry, after the shooting, went up to, I think it was Glenn King and made sure, and I think Chambers up here, this very tall detective, actually said that they saw a third person wheel the camera out. And after the shooting, they went up to the two camera operators and said, "Hey, there was a third person with you. Where were they?" And of course, they said, "Well, it was only us two." So I contend that the third person that Lowry at best might have seen was Jimmy Turner coming over to stop the camera from toppling over. A little bit of a lie on Lowry's part when he was talking to the Dallas Police Department. He said that he actually ran over, left his spot, and ran over to stop the camera from toppling over. Well, as we've just seen here, he stayed perfectly still. So a good little thing to clear up. That was something that really didn't eventuate much after after the police investigation. It was referred to in the HSCA final report as one possible way in which Ruby could have entered. But again, even in the HSCA, they covered what I just covered then in terms of it couldn't have been Ruby. So just moving on with the footage, this hulking figure here is Blackie Harrison. He's smoking a cigar, and that's something I'll ask you to remember for a little bit later on as well. Now, what everyone's getting ready for now is a squad car to actually come up and move up the ramp. So by this particular point in time, it's actually now been decided that Oswald will be taken in a police car and the armoured truck will be used as a decoy. So now what the plan was this squad car, which is about to come across the screen, it's actually going to drive out the wrong way up the Main Street ramp, all the way around the outside of the City Hall complex, and then basically make sure that it's at the front of the convoy in front of the armoured truck as basically a lead car in that convoy. So everyone's milling about. We have Peter Worthington here. He was a reporter from Canada. I think it was Toronto. Robert Huffaker. If you watch this footage, it's predominantly his voice that we hear, and it's pretty funny. He keeps referring to Lee Harvey Oswald as Lee Harold Oswald, even after he was shot, which is pretty funny. I believe that man that walked across would have been Jimmy Turner getting into position. And this, I believe, is Captain Orville Jones. He's starting to move everyone aside now, so Rio Pierce can drive his car up the ramp. In the back, he's got Billy Joe Maxey. He's sitting in the back, and here's Putnam, who was standing at the ramp at the back of the armoured truck, basically clearing the way. Putnam's actually going to get into the passenger's seat halfway up the ramp and be in this car as it makes the journey around City Hall. So you can see two figures in the car just then. All right, clock starts ticking now. It's probably about now, we're talking about a minute until Oswald emerges and would indeed be shot. Now, remember this. I'm sure you all remember that it was originally stipulated that Ruby came in through into the basement down the Main Street ramp, and this was validated by the fact that he saw a squad car come out. He basically used that as cover, and even saw Rio Pierce driving the squad car to get out of there. So that could only mean that he came down the Main Street ramp. So now we literally only have a minute before the tragic event of Oswald being shot takes place. Blackie Harrison standing here, cool as a cucumber. Interesting now that he's actually stood back and looked up at the ramp, and he'll do so again pretty soon. He knew Jack Ruby for 12 years prior to this moment. So if Jack Ruby had actually was walking down the Main Street ramp, and maybe had done so by this particular point in time, pretty safe to say that Blackie Harrison in these movements, there he is looking up again, he would have seen his old mate Jack Ruby walking down the ramp. So now everyone getting into position. This is really why I wanted to do this little commentary, is really to correct myself and the record. In my book, I actually stated that this man was Detective E.R. Beck, and following him was Ike Pappas and Maurice Carroll. I must give a shout out to Linda Zambanini. She helped me to identify that wasn't E.R. Beck. And through doing a little bit more research into Jeremiah O'Leary, I was able to identify that this man was Jerry O'Leary. That's important for another tangent that I'll go into in a little bit. That's to do with the whole stairs versus elevator story. But what we have here is Jerry O'Leary, Ike Pappas, and Maurice Carroll emerging from the the jail office corridor. So this corridor leads up to Harwood Street, getting into position very soon before Oswald emerges. Probably the only other thing to note at this particular point in time as Detective Swain walks out is that there were car horns, there were beeps throughout this footage that can be heard. A lot of people have contended that there were car horns that were signals for Ruby to get into place, but also for Fritz, to tell Fritz that the Ruby was set, the scene was set for the shooting. Look, I'm not sure about that. Just because there were, as you listen to this footage, you will hear car horns quite often. In the 20 minutes or so before this particular point comes up. So, were there signals? I don't think Ruby needed to be signaled. I don't think Fritz needed to be signaled. Because as we'll see, it's hard to see in this footage, but Fritz does look out and scan across the scene. So if that's what he needed to see if Ruby was in place, then I'm sure he would have been able to, even though he was slightly obscured, only by, from this angle, people like Ike Pappas. Anyway, I'll keep the footage going now, and we will see, obviously, the shooting. Fritz leaving a wide berth in front of Lavelle, and obviously he's handcuffed to Oswald, and Graves is on the other side. Look at this big gap here. Some kind of security cordon, right? It wasn't there. There was no regard for Oswald's security in this particular point in time as well. No formation. Uselessly, there was Detective Montgomery right behind Oswald, and of course in between Lavelle and Graves. But Ruby had the perfect opportunity, as we can see here, to step out and do what he did. So I'll just leave that going for another few seconds, and I'll stop the screen share. But you can see that there is just an absolute massive pylon, and in a few seconds, no one will be. It's like Ruby and Oswald were spirited away back to the jail office, and that's the end of that bit of footage. So let me just stop sharing, and I'll come back to you now. So that is a very, very interesting, kind of examination of, I guess, the moments before the Oswald shooting. Did anyone have any comments or any questions or anything of note from what I covered just then?
There's a chap called Ralph Sink who posts on Facebook a similar piece of film that seems to depict the fact that Ruby is black bagged over his head as he's pulled away, and he speculates wildly, in my opinion, that in fact this was because it was not Jack Ruby, but it was an assassin. So I'm interested in your expert comments.
Thank you very much for that. I actually will come to that. The detective that is alleged to have covered Ruby, and I think he did. It's very clear, and I actually have some prepared slowed down footage for you, so we can all look over that together. Was Lewis Miller. He was a very new assignment to the Juvenile Bureau. And I've got a very interesting, if any of you have read the book, you may remember my coverage of Miller and Blackie Harrison in the book. But no, thank you for the query. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I will come to it. Johnny.
How you doing, Paul? You okay?
Good mate, good mate.
What do you make of the before Oswald gets let out, Lavelle tells Fritz to go and make sure that the car's in position, the coast is clear, and Fritz apparently walks out and gives the signal for them to start walking through the door. Of course, the car wasn't in position, and Fritz creates that gap for Ruby to step in and shoot Oswald. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so the cars weren't in position. A number of reporters in particular testified to being distracted by this car, reversing, through a crowd somehow. And I think that's where a couple of the beeps came from. And Doherty, one of the officer that was driving the car that Oswald was being led to, he testified that he'd honked the horn because people were in his way. So yes, the cars weren't in position, and when you look at the Davidson footage, which shows Oswald being brought out of the elevator, there's a cut. now I've worked out that cut was only barely 2 or 3 seconds, and people did testify. I think Lavelle testified, like you said, and others that there was a bit of a delay. I think Woodrow, the jail office captain, the man in the uniformed white hat beyond Oswald when he was shot at the time, the uniformed officer said as much as well. So yes, I think that was the case. Fritz walked out. You can see him look around, and he does turn to motion for Lavelle and Graves to come out. So I think that's literally what it was. He might have seen Doherty's car starting to reverse. I'm not sure, because we don't, in all of the footage, we only see Doherty's car come in right at the last minute, and he literally makes contact with Ruby's leg. Cool. Okay, well, I'll move on to the next part. I'll share. There we go. Okay. So I just wanted to now talk a little bit about how really this is probably the biggest segment of my talk today is the proof of complicity by Dallas police in terms of the shooting. So really what I'm touching on here is the positions of the Western Union in proximity to the Annex building and old Dallas City Hall building. Now, the red cross here shows where Roy Vaughan was standing, and obviously at the mouth of the Main Street ramp. You can see, if you're, hopefully you can see my mouse cursor okay, but this is the ramp opening Commerce Street. So the ramp opening is here at Main Street. So the official version, and I understand that there was another speaker that was going to devote a bit of time to Roy Vaughan, so I hadn't prepared too much on Roy Vaughan, who was the patrol officer that was standing guard up here and was initially blamed by quite a few people, including Chief Jesse Curry, that Ruby slipped by and it was Vaughan's fault. And that's how Ruby was able to make the journey from the Western Union building, which is where it was at the time, further east along Main Street, walking along here, Main Street, the front of the Annex building, and simply slipped down the Main Street ramp and obviously got into position in the basement down here. But Vaughan was vindicated by...
Paul, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
It was Chris Gallup, and he had to withdraw from the event through illness or a medical.
Oh, okay.
So if you do want to talk with Vaughan,
cheers, Neil. I will.
You're
Thanks.
welcome to. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So Roy Vaughan was very quickly vindicated. Jack Revell was found him to be very credible, and that's because of a couple of witnesses that were actually up here on Main Street at the time. So there was Harry Tasker, who was actually had his his taxi parked on a 45-degree angle, and it was actually facing the Main Street ramp. He was actually he was keeping the meter running for one of the out-of-town reporters. I think it was Paul Cisco from Miami. He was basically standing there watching the ramp. We also had Don Flusha. I'm not sure how you say that name, but he wasn't assigned to anything to do with Oswald's transfer. He was in the patrol division. I think he was a sergeant at the time, maybe a lieutenant. He was parked here, so literally across the entrance to the Annex building, his squad car, and he had the radio on. He was listening to what was going on because he clearly knew that the transfer was going to happen. He knew Jack Ruby, and he never saw Ruby make the distance by foot along Main Street in front of him, in front of the Annex building, and of course down Main Street. Harry Tasker over here, he never saw anyone enter the ramp before the shooting. I think it was Bert Griffin, the Warren Commission. He tried to trip Harry Tasker up with semantics in terms of how he was faced and all of that, but his testimony seems to be credible, and he stuck by his guns. But what's clouded the issue a little bit was Napoleon Daniels. He was an ex-police officer at the time. He happened to see, so his story goes, happened to see a crowd forming, and put two and two together and realised that it must have had something to do with Oswald's transfer. So he came over. I think he parked his car in this lot, which was an empty lot back then as well, and came over and joined Roy Vaughan and basically stood around and watched. Now he flip-flopped on his testimony, saying that he did see someone enter the ramp, but he wasn't wearing a hat. And it took a few testimonies for him to have his say in terms of when that person walked down the ramp. He was even given a lie detector test, which I think we know now isn't the most solid equipment for an investigation, but back then they were relied upon, and he failed that as well. So that didn't help Vaughan's cause initially. But there was also William J. Newman, who was probably the only other person who was down in the basement who testified somewhat to seeing someone walking down the ramp. But again, he was probably, of all the personnel, of all the people that were interviewed by the Dallas police, he was interviewed 4 times by the Dallas police, and he flip-flopped. He said that he saw someone that matched Ruby's description walking down the ramp, but because of where he was positioned and how low the ceilings were, he couldn't have possibly seen the top of the ramp to therefore know if whoever it was he saw, whenever he saw them walking down the ramp, was Jack Ruby. His story even devolved into, and this is when he was testifying for the Warren Commission, so obviously the stakes were a little bit higher. He said that the man that he saw must have been a reporter, because he jumped through the railing, and there was a scuffle, apparently, that according to this Newman, a reserve officer Newman, this scuffle broke out. He wasn't even sure if it was before or after the shooting, so not very credible. Jimmy Turner, the director that I referred to before, is helping his 2 cameramen holding the tripod down. His testimony was actually manipulated in the Warren report. What he actually said when he was testifying for the Warren Commission was that he saw a figure walk down the ramp, but only from halfway down, which, the ramp it could be climbed up into through the railing. And there is a diagram which Turner provided on the schematic of the basement that shows where he first saw this figure that he couldn't identify as Ruby either, just walking down the ramp for the first time and blending in with the crowd. So at best, that's who the corroborated Ruby supposedly coming down the Main Street ramp. So we say that the record is that Jack Ruby provided transferred money to Karen Carlin, $25 from the Western Union office, and he had his receipt, the proof of transaction, stamped at 11:17. The shooting of Oswald took place at 11:21. So that gave Ruby, of course, 4 minutes or so, depending on when the seconds rounded to the nearest minute, to get into position. Now, I've done a little bit of a cobbled together on Google Maps. You can see it's a little bit crude here, I'm sorry. Google Maps wasn't wide enough for me to show the whole panorama of both the Annex building and further up Main Street. But what we can see here is roughly the position just west of the Western Union. And we get a great view here of the Annex building and, of course, Dallas City Hall. Now, what I've put here is the cross, which tracks back to the position which I have here to show where it was that Ruby, of course, came down the ramp. But what I think a great deal, many others say, is that Ruby actually, it's more likely, in fact, I think it's the only way he could have entered the basement was through this side door. Now, at the time, there was a bit of a laneway, which meant I don't think he could have just crossed straight over the car park. I think there was a laneway that went down the side of the Main Street, the Annex building from Main Street. But you can see here is the doorway as it stands today. So that was an outer door that I believe was left unlocked for Ruby to simply walk through, and all he would have needed to have done was walk through a corridor after this door, the length of the Annex building, to where the elevator block was, and down there simply walk down some stairs and basically get into position and be there well and truly within 4 minutes to be in position to step out and shoot Oswald. I know some researchers, and I gather that David Josephs in his talk with you last year mentioned the possibility that someone was standing at any one of these windows in the annex building, because again, back in 1963, this is pretty much what it was like back then as well. There was an open view. So very easy for Ruby to either be seen or signalled to enter and obviously come in and shoot Oswald. I actually think that Ruby was the signal. I think could have just been a very simple case of someone standing in any one of these windows and waiting and watching as Ruby entered the Western Union building. And then when they saw him exit and obviously walking towards City Hall, that was when the transfer might have been triggered. So yeah, that's just a little bit more on how Ruby, of course, entered the building. What I wanted to probably touch on now is some key suspects. Now, I know that Kenneth Croy is someone that has been mentioned and justifiably when it comes to the case of the Tippett shooting. I won't go into that, but his movements on that day, that afternoon, being in close proximity, is very suspicious. That of course we must regard alongside William, Captain Westbrook. Kenneth Croy has been mentioned as being suspicious, but also in regards to the Oswald shooting, because it is true that Jack Ruby came to stand directly next to Kenneth Croy in the basement behind Blackie Harrison. Now, it's also true that Kenneth Croy knew Jack Ruby, so people have posited that that might have been the person that met Jack Ruby in the basement, at the bottom of the stairs from the annex building down into the basement, and was his escort across the car park, that very short distance to help him get through the railing and all of that. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think Croy would have needed to have helped Ruby at all. The area where Ruby would have come out of the stairs was largely unguarded. I can get into that a little bit later as well. So Ruby, all he needed to do was say, go stand near Kenneth Croy and Blackie Harrison, and you'll be able to do the rest from there. I think it could have been as simple as that. Charles Arnett, the reserve captain, he's someone that might figure into this as well. He too was standing where Croy and Ruby were. He's the older gentleman in the white police cap that you can see as the post shooting footage kind of goes a little bit crazy and starts to look up the ramp. So that was Charles Arnett. He was in his late 50s at the time. Interestingly, he fits the description of an elderly reservist with white hair, who an off-duty cop, Clyde Goodson, come Uber driver for reporters on the day, actually was told Gene Barnes that was the person who let Jack Ruby in. So this elderly reservist with white hair was who Jack Ruby let in, according to this Clyde Goodson. So we're not sure if that how much that holds water, but another person of interest in that scheme of things. I'm just now going to jump into talk a little bit more about Blackie Harrison. This is a very interesting chap, Blackie Harrison. Now I've already pointed him out. He was who was standing with the cigar, waiting around for Oswald to emerge. I've just transposed him, highlighted him rather, in the famous Bob Jackson photograph of the moment Oswald shot. And you can see, this Leonid Brezhnev lookalike at the moment that he's trying to, I mustn't laugh, but it is almost laughable. At the moment he's trying to stop Jack Ruby from shooting Oswald, he's taking a puff on a cigar. So there you go. But there he is as well. He's looking down at Oswald as Oswald's being brought out on a stretcher there. But Blackie Harrison is a very, very interesting character in all of this. So the story goes with Mr. Harrison was that he arrived at Dallas City Hall at 8 o'clock in the morning as usual, and with with Detective Miller, who we referred to earlier as the person that threw a bag over Ruby. Miller and Harrison actually went to the Deluxe Diner, which was a little bit further up Commerce Street, actually pretty close to where Ruby's Carousel Club was. And it was fairly custom, the personnel would clock on and then they would go and grab a coffee or breakfast from somewhere nearby. So that's what Blackie Harrison and Miller did. And I'm sure some or most of you know, while Harrison was at the diner, he was on the phone a great deal. Now, who he was on the phone to has never been testified or stated to. If you asked Harrison and Miller, and it took a lot to get it out of them, it was one of the personnel from back in the office merely calling Harrison or Harrison calling the office and being told to come back because the transfer was going to happen. That was Detective Goolsby, who apparently spoke with Harrison at the diner. But the thing was, there was so they did come back. Harrison and Miller did come back. Miller's story, he returned back to the third floor bureau, the office from which Harrison in the juvenile bureau as well and Miller were based from. Miller went back to the office, but Harrison didn't. He didn't. He actually is without an alibi for the next few hours. So if you think they were at the coffee shop for potentially an hour at most, that still would have left him a couple of hours of completely unaccounted time from until when he would actually emerge in the basement, having come up from the sub-basement locker room, where apparently he was down just to get his cigars, and which you can see in the picture he's smoking. That was the way he explained where he had been, but he could have been down there for any number of hours. Now, the thing about the locker room was it had street access to Commerce Street, so I guess that's how he would have been able to get back in and all the while avoiding going back up to the third floor office. And whilst there were he had access to payphones, TV and TVs and everything, and of course vending machines. Interesting story. There were a couple of City Hall workers, and I referred to this in my talk to you last year, so I won't go into that too much. They came into the locker room around about the time that I think Blackie Harrison was down there manning the phones, potentially being a point person. And they came into the locker room to watch the TV, hope to watch the transfer take place on live television, because they weren't allowed to stay in the basement over near the elevators to watch it. They'd been asked to move on. But when these two City Hall workers came into the locker room, they were turned away and told there's no point watching the transfer down here. It's not going to be shown live anyway. What a strange thing for anyone to say. The two City Hall workers did testify for the Warrant Commission, but they weren't pushed to identify who that person was. I think that was Blackie Harrison. The best they did was, I think it was Alfredia Riggs, one of the workers, gave a very general description of, I think he worked out of the jail office, or he might have been a police officer, a detective, I'm not sure, something along those lines. So he's very vague in his description. I think that was our friend here, Blackie Harrison. And he was down in the basement because he was running point. He might have been the person that Jack Ruby was on the phone to back at his apartment. He's a very suspicious character. But anyway, it came to the time when the transfer was about to happen, and Blackie Harrison comes back up the stairs from the locker room. And when he emerges in the basement, it was actually Detective Cuttshaw who, when he saw him, he said, "Where have you been?" And that's when Harrison said that, I was downstairs getting cigars. Well, that to me, that implies, and again, it's just an inference, that this his fellow detective was actually noticed that Harrison had been absent and had seen him going, "Where have you been?" So I think that he's incredibly suspicious, and like I say, I think he was someone that was using the phones down there to keep in contact, maybe even communications across City Hall and outside to whoever, to whether it was Ruby directly or some kind of handler. I'm not sure, but the possibilities are endless because he had 2 hours at least of unaccounted time. He was never able to explain it. He's a very suspicious character. Now I'm going to move on to Detective Lewis Miller. So thank you for the point about that video that you would have seen about Jack Ruby being covered over and covered up immediately after the shooting. I think it is true. It did happen. Now, why is the $64,000 question? And yes, unfortunately, it's laid us bare to some pretty outlandish theories about, it wasn't really Jack Ruby who was shooting, who shot Oswald. I've got some thoughts about that, which are probably best discussed with you all over a beer one day. But we can now if you want, that's fine. But Detective Lewis Miller, he was a very suspicious character because not only did he go to the Deluxe Diner with Blackie Harrison, he actually got all the way through his Warren Commission testimony, and Bert Griffin actually went off the record with Miller. And it was only after, when they returned to being back on the record, that Griffin asked Miller about his little excursion to the Deluxe Diner with Blackie Harrison. So Miller wasn't a very forthcoming witness. He also was bristling at being recorded and having to swear under oath and everything like that. So his first testimony was delayed because he was clearly not very happy with having to be sworn in. Probably the other thing to mention about Miller and Harrison together are they're the only Dallas police personnel that actually had lawyers present with them when they were testifying for the Warren Commission. So a very, very interesting couple of characters there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in the footage of Miller covering up Jack Ruby. And you'll be able to see I've actually slowed it down. No sound because the sound is pretty crazy. Here we see Jack Ruby being set upon. This is Blackie Harrison. This is Graves. This is Lavelle. Detective McMillan is stepping in, the man in the hat. The man without the hat is Lewis Miller, Blackie Harrison's mate. Now watch now. Slowed it right down. Ruby's hatless head, clearly covered up.
But he had it ready.
Yeah.
What does everyone think of that? I'll throw that open to the floor.
He had the hood ready.
No, that's
Did he have the hood ready was the question. Oh,
Bentley.
it looks like him, doesn't it?
No, it's Bentley.
Sorry, what was that?
The question was, did he have the hood ready? When he stepped forward, do you think he had the hood ready, put over Ruby's head?
Yeah, I think it was some kind of maybe a jacket or something.
Yeah.
Because you can see Ruby's hatless head, and all of a sudden it's not there anymore. And he might have been obscured by whoever it was, Graves or Harrison, who had been forced around. But there is clearly something being put over Ruby's head. So to me, what that signifies is foreknowledge. Forget about whether it was Ruby as the shooter. Detective Lewis D. Miller was ready and prepared to cover up the man who shot Oswald. Simple as that. Now, the closest we came to any kind of explanation from Lewis Miller about that was he just told because I think it was to the Dallas Police Department. He just said that Ruby was propelled towards him. That's all he said. That was his only explanation. And of course, they probably didn't have the technology, and no one was going to testify to one of their fellow police officers covering this shooter up straight away. But I mean, to me, that reminds me of Oswald's apprehension at Texas Theatre. There was attempts to cover him up as well. So, I mean, right there, if we want proof of foreknowledge on at least one person from Dallas Police perspective of the shooting, well, I think we have it right there.
Paul, Johnny's just shown me a photograph outside the Texas Theatre the arrest where Bentley is, you've got Bentley and the patrolman and so forth. Let me just see if I can show it to you. Hang on a sec. I don't know if can you get close up of me? No.
It's Nancy.
It's Nancy.
Yep, I've got you.
No, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll get Johnny just to send it to you now. You can perhaps pick, if you want to later on just display it, you can. Yeah, send it to Paul.
Yeah, I've got my emails going if you want to send it.
Yeah, do you know Paul's email, Johnny? PA 1525 at tutor.com, tuta. Could you, whilst we're waiting, can you show the clip again, but not in ultra slow motion? Because I think it's a bit blurry, isn't it, in ultra slow motion?
Okay. Well, what I can do is I'll actually go back to the commentary footage because you can actually see it there.
Because I do think you can see it clearly as you
know. We need Bart Camp on this case.
Is
he there?
Well, he's on next, and he's obviously desperately trying to do his presentation before before he appears.
Shooting him on live TV and trying to think what's over his head, is it more to minimise what he could do? So, like, carving down an animal by putting something over their head. I don't know. But what's the reason? So, why is that such a big thing in this country?
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. Well, how would he know to be ready? Because if we watch it in real time, and I'm just going to cue it up now. I mean, he has literally walked in, and it all takes place within a second. That is very quick to react, and somehow he's clearly still wearing his own jacket, Miller. So we can't even say he quickly whipped off his jacket in the interest of subduing this horrible person.
Well, we can't say it was so hot down there. He was jacketless, and it was in his hand, and he just, he just reacted very quickly. He's wearing a suit jacket anyway, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, let's. I'm just bringing the footage in. So we want to. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. So you ready? It happens very quickly, and that's the point. Okay. All right. So let me just take it back a couple of seconds. How was that?
That explains why we didn't notice previously. The argument from Ralph Sink on the earlier question about identifying Ruby is he says that some of the photography has been altered and you can't actually see Ruby's face correctly.
Sure, you can't. That's true. Yeah, you can't. And what probably, where I get a little bit suspicious on that front as well. And as investigators, we shouldn't, we should never, write off, possibilities. We should always investigate with an open mind. To me, the thing that stands out the most is in the Bob Jackson photograph. You can see Ruby's neckline, the hairline. Well, the shooter, it's very different to Ruby's. Ruby's was clean cut, whereas his hairline when shooting Oswald is a little bit more rounded, and very, very different to the hairline that Ruby has in his mugshots. So, but I think and that was a big motivation for me with the book, was saying, you know what, there are some crazy stories flying around out there about Oswald shooting. And I think some of them have merit, but it's the way you go about it. And for me, writing the book but using as much evidence as possible, and following that, I had no predetermined outcome of what I wanted to land on. It was just about writing down what I was uncovering as I was uncovering it. And to me, that is something that I've always found odd. Is yes, this fair point for questioning if it actually was Ruby that shot Oswald. Stranger things have happened. Johnny, your photos come through, so I'm just going
Hang
to.
on, there's one more question. Hang on a second, please, Paul.
Australian. In relation to the Western Union building, where was Ruby's car parked? And is it true that the dogs were in it?
Yeah, so it was parked just across the road. And sorry, is that an Australian accent I detect?
In Sydney. Yeah.
Cool. So it was parked just further along Main Street, and yes, he left his dogs in the car, and he also left, I think it was about $1,200 of cash, his wallet, his identification, and it was I think it was Vernon Smart that went and with Ruby's keys went and liberated the dogs, and they were taken to the city pound. And apparently there's a mystery around that as well, but I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm just bringing up your photo, Johnny, if there wasn't anything else. All right. Yo, zoom in on that. Interesting.
Well, the other interesting thing is the cigar smoking similarity.
Yeah, that's Bentley, isn't it?
It is Bentley, yeah.
Yes, interesting. But did anyone else have any comments or any?
Can I ask?
Yeah, there's two.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Was it Captain Fritz who was in front of Oswald when they go through?
It was, yes, yeah.
Wasn't his job to be a bit closer to Oswald?
100%, yeah, and that's what I was saying in the commentary segment. He left at least, if we're going to be kind, 6 feet of a gap between him and Oswald, and of course that's why I think that Ruby didn't need any kind of signalling. It was all he needed to do was be able to look past not even Blackie Harrison, who was standing behind, but look ahead to his left and be able to time everything perfectly. So yeah, Fritz left the door wide open, as it were.
Oh,
yeah. Hi, Paul. It's Scott Reed here.
Scott, there you go.
Just around whether it was Ruby who actually shot Oswald. I mean, Mike and I were talking about this in Dallas a couple of years ago. Did Ruby not say something like, "Hey guys, you know me, I'm Jack," etc.?
He did.
Which would,
yeah, he did. So and even when he said that, is contended. Widely contended. I think he said that in the jail office. The most accounts of him saying that seem to have had him saying it there. So Thomas McMillan, who was the hatted man that approached Oswald before Miller with his bag did, he said that. So Ruby said that. But then others said that he was saying it straight away when he was on the ground being set upon in that scene that we just watched. So it's just, and again, that was one of the things that drew me into this case, was just the amount of contradictions, not just across separate people's statements, but within statements of the same person, contradictions. So yeah, that's another good example. But he did say that, yes.
Hi, Paul. I just want a quick one. Going back to Jack Ruby at the Western Union office, was that Western Union office the closest to Ruby's apartment?
No.
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a good question. It only would have taken him apparently 12 to 15 minutes at that time of day to get from his Oak Cliff apartment to the Western Union. So I gather so. The whole thing with the money transfer wasn't a spur of the moment thing either. That kind of drew back to the previous night, because he'd shut down his clubs. Karen Carlin needed money. I presume all of his employees were going to be going without. So Ruby had set up. He'd agreed to meet Carlin and her husband Bruce at his club to give some money, but Ruby didn't show up, and I think he just left $5 for someone like Andrew Armstrong to give Karen, and it wasn't enough. So that might have been the Friday night even. But anyway, when he spoke to, I think it was Bruce Carlin the Saturday night, presumably because that money wasn't enough, he said, "It's okay. I'll wire you. Call me in the morning. I'll wire you some money tomorrow. That's fine." So it was Ruby that actually said he would be the person that would transfer that sum of money to Karen Carlin in Fort Worth, where she would be.
I do know there was a Western Union quite close to his apartment. The question is whether it was open or not. That's the thing.
Yeah.
If it was open, why didn't he just go there?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Well, I think it was a part of the setup. It was, it was all to have him in the area and suddenly be taken with this emotion of seeing Oswald's transfer about to take place, do something about it. But I think it was all part of the a reason for him to be there, and of course that's premeditation on his part.
Just a quick one. Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I gotcha.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm not sure if I believe that it wasn't Ruby as well. More inclined to think it was him. But if it wasn't him, then I guess the question is, what happened to the person who was on the floor who did do it? And secondly, then Ruby would have taken the fall for it. I guess he would then have been a kind of patsy himself.
Yep.
If it wasn't Ruby doing the shooting, it's a bit of a weird one, that.
It really is, and I'm gonna step down the rabbit hole.
Thanks, Mike.
A little bit more on this.
I don't believe it myself, but
I don't know what to believe is my answer.
The bloody switch was in the elevator, yeah.
What I do know is there was Tom Howard. I presume we all know who Tom Howard was. He would turn out to be Ruby's first attorney within a couple of hours of him shooting Oswald. He was actually there in the basement at the time of the shooting. Now, very oddly, he was situated. He was able to get into the basement through the Harwood Street entrance, which again makes you question the security. And he looked through the jail office window, and apparently he said to Reynolds, or Detective Reynolds, or McGee, I've seen everything I need to see, and basically walked back the way he came. So that was apparently when Oswald was coming out of the elevator. I wonder if that's, and this is the rabbit hole side of things, I wonder if there was something going on with Jack Ruby in the, if we're going to take the assumption or play devil's advocate that Ruby wasn't the real shooter, but he was in the jail office ready to be switched over. I wonder if that's not what Howard was referring to. Interestingly, in the footage that you see of Jack Ruby being led through the jail office to the elevator, he's just wearing a shirt. So there's no jacket, there's no tie. He's literally wearing a shirt. There was no testimony from anyone saying that when Jack Ruby was subdued on the jail office floor, that we removed his jacket, we removed a tie if he was wearing a tie, because of course we can't see that. There was no testimony of that. It was just all about him being laying face planted on the ground, handcuffed, picked up and led away. Nothing about him being partially undressed, even down there. So look, could Ruby have been some kind of plant? He was visited by Lewis Jolly West. Was that to be deprogrammed? Was he on drugs? Was he, there's so many possibilities, which obviously I don't go into in my book, but seeing as we're talking together as friends, it's good to wonder.
When I was with Robert Roden, Robert Roden said that, and I was indeed a class when they took me out for a day. He said that Ruby was taken up to Oswald's cell and put in there, and the question was whether he was to sort of clean up, check whether there was anything left in here.
Yep, that's something that I do go into in my book, and I do have a little bit prepared for that, because that's an interesting little. That's to me is the, I guess, aside from Miller shrouding Ruby, that's when a bit of the cover up really started to go into the next gear. And to do that, I probably need to reintroduce Sergeant Patrick Dean. So you might remember I'd said he was part of the detail that it was his responsibility to secure the basement. Let me just bring my piece up on Dean. This is him, Patrick Dean. So this is him talking to the press about 6 minutes after the shooting, saying that he thinks he saw, he knew who the shooter was, sorry, but he wouldn't name him. He was looking a bit flustered at that point, a little bit flush. After this footage, when this footage was taken, Sergeant Dean went up to the 3rd floor expecting to find Jack Ruby up there. And that was so as to find out how he entered the basement and because he was in charge of security. I think that's a pretty tenuous kind of explanation right there anyway. But when Ruby wasn't there, apparently he was instructed by Jesse Curry to take Secret Service Forrest Sorrells up to the 5th floor jail where Ruby actually was. Now, Ruby at that time, when Dean and Forrest Sorrells got up to the 5th floor, Ruby he wasn't actually in a jail cell. They were keeping him in the corridor of the jail cell. He wasn't in one at that particular point in time. He was just literally being sat down. There were no other prisoners up there because obviously Oswald himself was being kept in confinement. But when Dean here took Forrest Sorrells up there, that's where he found Ruby. Now, interestingly, Dean said that he among other things, he asked Jack Ruby how he came to enter the basement. And it was apparently at this particular point in time with Dean, Forrest Sorrells, and a couple of the detectives that escorted Ruby from the jail office up to the 5th floor. In their presence, this is when Dean apparently asked Jack how he got in to the basement. And this is when Jack Ruby said, I came in off the Main Street ramp. I walked down. I couldn't have timed it any better. Words to that effect. Thing is, Forrest Sorrells never corroborated that. He never corroborated Jack Ruby saying at that time in his presence, up in the 5th floor jail, that Jack Ruby told how he entered the basement. And the police officers, so they were detectives Archer, Clardy, and McMillan, in their first statements for the Dallas police investigation, they didn't even back up what Dean said. It was only after their initial statements and they're on to the Warren Commission and Ruby's trial that they backed up Dean by saying that that's when Jack Ruby said he entered the basement. Ruby did admit to entering the basement. We know that because we actually have Forrest Sorrells. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. These are Forrest Sorrells' notes from when he actually got to interview Jack Ruby later on that afternoon. You can see here in the red 3:15 p.m. So to me, that tallies with when he said, and Fritz as well said, that they started to interrogate Ruby. And then further down, you can see some scribble here. Tom Howard, this is Fred Brunner, Stanley Kaufman, and Jim Martin. I wonder if any of you, if that name rings a bell with any of you, Jim Martin. But down here in the circle, you can see came in off Main Street ramp. Can you all see that pretty clearly?
Yeah.
So I think what happened was Jack Ruby didn't say anything about coming in off the Main Street ramp when he was with Dean and company up on the 5th floor and supposedly the jail cell that Oswald was in. I actually think that it was after Sorrells had left the 5th floor and Ruby got to meet Tom Howard. I think it was Tom Howard that fed him something to say about how he came in and found himself in the basement. Because it's only after his time with Tom Howard, when Ruby was talking to Fritz and Sorrells, that we can actually see the first record of how Ruby said he entered the basement. So that kind of puts a really, really big spotlight on Patrick Dean. Patrick Dean, he also got himself tied up in knots when talking to the Warren Commission. He was asked about the area underneath the annex building in the car park where the elevators and the base, the stairway came down from the annex building. He said that that door was locked. I know it was locked, from the annex building. And even Griffin said, well, it couldn't have been because it was an emergency exit. It's a fire escape. That would defeat the purpose of it being a fire escape if it was lockable on the outside. But Dean was adamant that he asked one of the maintenance workers to lock it, and none of them that were interviewed ever admitted to that. So I think Dean is pretty suspicious, and it was in that particular point of his testimony where Griffin took him off the record. They had a break, and that's when Bert Griffin went up to him, somewhere and said, are you okay? I think you're lying, and you're not doing yourself any favors with what you're saying. You're getting yourself caught up. I don't believe you. I believe you're a good person, but I can help you. The words to that effect. Dean said, no, I'm telling the truth. And then they resumed his testimony. That exchange is what got Bert Griffin basically taken out of Dallas and exiled back to Washington, because Dean complained up the line as far as Henry Wade. And Dean himself even was taken to Washington, given the chance to testify again, and this time before Earl Warren, Alan Dulles, like the upper echelon of the Warren Commission, and was practically apologised to for being the inference that he was being called a liar. That wasn't the job of any of the Warren Commission to question the credibility of anyone. So I think Dean was protected. He was very suspicious. He also removed the 2 reserve officers that were posted outside the door that Ruby, I believe, walked down from the annex building through to get into position.
Well,
a really long answer to your question about the jail cell, but yes, I think Ruby did say in overnight, at least on the 24th, in Oswald's cell as well. Yeah.
Didn't Jack? Patrick Dean say to Ruby, "God damn it, Jack, you've got me one hell of a fix."
Yep, and that was apparently at the time, when apparently even Dean was a part of the group that piled onto Jack Ruby. That's apparently when that was said. No one else backed that up, but I'm not sure why Dean would come out and say something like that.
For what it's worth, Paul Beverly Oliver claims that Patrick Dean was on the knoll.
Oh, right, interesting.
With Roscoe White.
Interesting.
I've
not heard that.
4 hours on that one.
Nothing surprises. He was, and you all know that he got to.
It's a claim in her book that.
And Paul as well. Ruby says during his testimony that who else could have planned it so perfectly by seconds if it were timed that way, and someone in the police department is guilty of giving information as to when Lee Harvey Oswald was coming down. So is that kind of like nodding a wink to he was in this position?
Who knows? Who knows if he actually said that?
Cool. We need to pick up the pace a little bit here, because I don't know how many slides we've got left. I know we were a bit late starting, but
no, that's okay. Well, look, I've probably only got one other thing that I can really focus on. I've really hit some big points. I know. One thing, and I myself, I must admit, I'm a little bit time poor now. I've got about 5 or 10 minutes as well where I'll have to run off. So I will be very quick. But I did want to come back to the whole stairs versus elevator saga. I cover it very briefly in my book, and with basically I left a question mark off on it. So the stairs versus elevator story. I'll be very, very quick on this. Let me sum it up. There were 3 reporters, Jeremiah O'Leary, Ike Pappas, and Maurice Carroll, who separately claimed that they were up on the 3rd floor to witness Lee Harvey Oswald being led from the Homicide Bureau into the elevator, and somehow miraculously able to race down 4 or 5 sets of stairs that weren't continuous, and be down there in time, even before Oswald was brought out of the same elevator. I found footage of that elevator at the time that gives us a bit of a timing of how long it took to descend from the 3rd floor to the basement. Being kind when I say it's probably about 17 seconds. So that kind of disproves these chaps' kind of story. No one else vouched for them either. None of the police officers, police personnel said that there were, these particular reporters were up there at the time of the start of Oswald's transfer. Apparently, one of them asked Oswald if he had any last words, and Oswald said, "I want to speak to someone from the ACLU." Again, no one was able to actually corroborate that. And apparently Ike Pappas as well, you can see kind of here, and here especially, he's holding a tape recorder. Apparently he had that on, like literally switched on to record the whole time. Well, funnily enough, the only audio evidence that ever surfaced was of Ike Pappas when he was giving commentary from this particular point here where he's just come from. So it's pretty strange that anything that might have supported him being up on the 3rd floor at that time never materialised. Moving on to, I guess, so what I did was I really picked up on, well, what was so special about what happened on the 3rd floor to make up this wild story about these 3 reporters, to make up the wild story of, seeing Oswald up there, asking the question about the ACLU, and then being able to get down and clearly be seen in footage. And I think it actually comes down to Jerry O'Leary. Now, I've written articles about this. It's on my Substack. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm going to be very brief when I give a description about him. He was intelligence linked. He was a US Marine Reserve. He was very good friends with David Phillips since the 1950s, Jerry O'Leary. He was J. Edgar Hoover, Arthur Deloach among their favourite reporters in Washington. He was the reporter for the Washington Evening Star. And he was even part of the effort to censor Jesse Curry, walk back the comments that Jesse Curry said about the Dallas police not being told of Oswald's presence in Dallas by the FBI like they normally are when it comes to a communist subversive like him. So O'Leary was relied upon by the FBI to do up a really big article that Jesse Curry would basically walk back those damning comments of the FBI. So he was clearly some kind of FBI asset at the time. Very, very quickly as well, while he was in Dallas, he met a CIA man, someone who he said was an unimpeachable source, who happened to tell him that Oswald had returned from Mexico City with $5,000. I repeat that again. Oswald returned from Mexico City, $5,000 in cash. O'Leary was told this by a CIA man in Dallas just after the weekend of November 22nd. Who that would be? Well, I think it might be his old mate, David Phillips. And I think that would have been, part of the whole campaign that, Alvarado and, these pre-prepared narratives, Hal Hendricks, Paul, I know you've written the Pepe letters, and I know there's, this could potentially tie in with that. I think that O'Leary was given that scoop to leak up to the FBI, and surely enough, he didn't report it. He reported it back up to the FBI, who sent it on to the State Department and the Warren Commission. And I think it was that nugget of information that J. Edgar Hoover passed on to Lyndon Johnson to leverage Earl Warren into heading up the Warren Commission. So that's a big thread that I've just pulled on there. But Jerry O'Leary, an intelligence-linked reporter. Anyway, so it turned out he was pretty central to the whole stairs versus elevator story. So they all gave, the reporters all gave statements at various times. So Jerry O'Leary first testified to the FBI about what he witnessed with Oswald's shooting. In that statement, there was no reference to him being up on the 3rd floor, him taking the stairs to beat the elevator down to the basement, and there wasn't even a reference to Oswald calling out for the ACLU up there. Ike Pappas, he was brought into it on December 2nd. He didn't give any reference to the stairs versus elevator story, and he didn't mention anything about Oswald's calling out for the ACLU up there. But come December 3rd, I think this is when the penny dropped for Jerry O'Leary, that he realised that he had been caught in footage down in the basement. Therefore, it would have been very hard for him to substantiate the reference that he broke. And this was the first record of Oswald calling out for the ACLU in an article that Jerry O'Leary wrote on the 25th, the day after the shooting, about his observations of Ruby shooting Oswald. And in this particular part here, Oswald calling out to speak to someone in the ACLU right there. So this is the first where I could find it first surfaced. So O'Leary was part of the big pile on to blame Oswald for the shooting. And I think because he was caught on footage with Ike Pappas and Maurice Carroll, the FBI kind of helped him with that to substantiate the story that they wanted him to break. And I think there was a bit of manipulation in the statements that Maurice Carroll and Ike Pappas gave after O'Leary started to drop reference to the stairs versus elevator in his statements to the FBI and the ACLU reference. Because come the 9th of December, Maurice Carroll, speaking to another FBI agent in New York, James J. Rogers, that's when Maurice Carroll mentioned, and it was in his only statement, that's when the stairs versus elevator was corroborated. And but even then, he didn't mention the ACLU story. The same FBI agent in New York spoke to Ike Pappas and, on the January the 7th, same one that spoke to Maurice Carroll. And that's when he was able to get some kind of semblance from Ike Pappas to Jerry O'Leary's story. So that's a really, I'm sorry, I've really rushed right through that, but it's a hell of a lot that I've thrown at you. But there was more to Jerry O'Leary than clearly met the eye as just being a very, just another reporter on the scene. So sorry to rush through that, but
no, that's no worries.
Are there any questions?
It's our fault. We were slightly late starting. Right. Any more questions, guys? No? Okay. Is there anything else you want to say at all, Paul, very quickly?
No, that was it. Thank you very much for your time today. I had some other things to go on, but all good. You're great to get some questions and interact with you all a little bit more. I hope to do it one day in person. I'm actually going to be in Dallas this year. I'm presenting at the JFK Lancer conference. Okay. So if any of you are going to be there, it'd be fantastic to catch up with you all in person and maybe even do a little bit of a trip around Dallas City Hall as well. That'd be really good.
Yeah, maybe we should tell Paul that we went to the city.
I have told him. I sent him all the photos.
Yeah. Those photos that you sent were very helpful to me. Thank you. Albeit I'd already published the book, but no, they're very useful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just one thing before you go. We thank you very much for the book that you donated for auction to the society. Just as a starting point, what is the recommended retail price?
I think in the UK it's I think it's 12 quid.
12 quid.
Okay. I mean,
so we'll have a bid starting at 2 quid then, yeah.
and you're paying for Paul Blow's forward. That's
it's Paul Blow's forward that it's all about. Okay, so now we know what the reserve price is anyway. Okay, all right. Well, thanks very much, Paul, and see you soon.
Talk to you all soon. Cheers.